Scientists were shocked after discovering a mechanical object in stone. Let's uncover the hidden treasures. Join us on this historic and mysterious journey. Listen to this, Neanderthal fiber technology.
No, I'm not joking, it's real.
In 2020, a group of scientists published research that totally changed how we see our ancient relatives. A discovery in France shook up archaeology forever, and it wasn't even the first time something like this had happened. But let's start from the beginning, Neanderthals. For the longest time, we pictured them like stereotypical cavemen. If Fred Flintstone comes to mind, you're not that far off, but why do we even have this stereotype? When did we start thinking Neanderthals weren't the sharpest tools in the evolutionary shed?
Well, meet William King, a 19th century British geologist. I was the first to call them Neanderthals. Based on the bones I found, scientists back then declared the species unintelligent. That label stuck with them for centuries.
But a tiny piece of string, just a quarter-inch long, changed everything. The discovery happened in a dry river valley called Abri du Maras. Archaeologists found a bit of twisted rope next to a stone tool. These fibers could have been used for anything from making clothes to fishing nets. Back in prehistoric times, that was some advanced tech, and it turns out Neanderthals were pretty good at it. Scientists already knew these early humans made tar from birch bark and crafted beads out of shells. There's even evidence of Neanderthal art, so no, they weren't primitive at all. This discovery, and others like it, are changing how we think about our ancestors. Archaeology is always evolving. Take Egypt's pyramids, for example. Turns out they weren't built by thousands of slaves collapsing from exhaustion. The confusion started with Herodotus, the famous Greek historian. Around 500 BCE, he claimed 100,000 men built the Great Pyramid at Giza. He didn't say who they were or why they were building it, and that's how the myth began. Giant stones dragged by humans under the whip of a taskmaster. But Egyptologists, those who study ancient Egyptian culture, see it differently. Recently, they discovered a workers' village that tells another story. Sure, the workers' bones show signs of hard labor, but construction is still tough even today. It took 6 years and 12,000 workers to build the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. In Egypt, 3 times that number finished the Great Pyramid in about 20 years. That's an incredible feat of ancient engineering, right? The Egyptian workers who built the pyramids were actually treated pretty well. Their diet was protein-rich, they had medical care, and they were paid fairly. In fact, their living conditions were often better than non-workers. They even lived with their families near the construction sites. How do we know all this? Archaeologists uncovered bakeries, dorms, bread jars, and other everyday stuff. Seems like the pharaohs were decent bosses after all. The job market wasn't so bad back then. They also kept detailed records of the construction on papyrus scrolls written in hieroglyphs. But reading those picture-like symbols, not so easy. Egyptologists faced the same problem for ages. Nobody had used those scripts in over 1,000 years, and it's not like there was an ancient Egyptian to English dictionary lying around. Then everything changed in 1822. About 2 decades earlier, the French had found a broken slab of black granite. It had the same text written in 3 scripts: Ancient Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Demotic, a simplified Egyptian script. The stone dated back to 196 BCE, and the content was a religious decree.
A French linguist and historian named Jean-François Champollion was the first to crack the code. People still knew how to read ancient Greek, so I matched the Greek letters to the Egyptian ones, and boom, we could finally read hieroglyphs.
That granite slab, it's known as the Rosetta Stone. Its discovery was so important, the term Rosetta Stone now refers to any key breakthrough that helps solve a long-standing mystery. There are even games like that, where a symbol is attached to a message and you decode it by matching the symbols to letters. That's basically what scientists did with the Rosetta Stone over 200 years ago.
And speaking of ancient scripts, do you know what the oldest deciphered language in Europe is? It has a pretty dull name, Linear B. It belonged to the Mycenaean Greeks and actually predates the classical Greek alphabet by centuries.
For centuries, people could easily guess where a script came from. Take Linear A, for example. The people of Crete used another script, Linear B, over 1,000 years ago, but during the late Bronze Age, the Greek civilization that used it vanished. and with it the ability to read Linear B. More importantly, no one even knew it existed.
That was about to change in the early 20th century. A British archaeologist named Sir Arthur Evans was digging at a massive palace complex in Knossos, Crete, Greece. This was the center of the Minoan civilization, the creators of this mysterious script. The palace had around 1,300 rooms, decorated with colorful paintings of dolphins, griffins, and bulls. These artworks fascinated archaeologists, but the biggest discovery was almost ignored at first. Thousands of clay tablets had been baked and preserved when a fire destroyed the palace, but nobody could read them. They were written in an unknown language.
It would take another 50 years before someone finally cracked the code. That someone was Michael Ventris, an English architect and code-breaking enthusiast. He had studied Greek and Latin, and during a lecture by a famous archaeologist, young Ventris made it his mission to solve the mystery of Linear B once and for all. And he did, by 1952.
One of the most surprising things Ventris discovered was that Linear B turned out to be an ancient form of Greek. But Linear A is still a mystery. No one has cracked it yet. Maybe someday, another curious young person like Ventris will do it. They don't even need to be a professional archaeologist.
Just look at Basil Brown. He wasn't a professional either, but in 1939 he discovered the richest early medieval burial site in all of Europe. It happened at Sutton Hoo in southeast England. And it wasn't just any old grave, it was a full-size ship, about 3 times longer than a London double-decker bus. And get this, the ship wasn't just for show, it was filled with treasures. Fancy hanging bowls, feasting gear, golden clothing accessories, luxurious textiles, you name it. Archaeologists were amazed to also find silverware all the way from distant Byzantium. You might know that city today as Istanbul, Turkey. Even now it's several days' drive from Sutton Hoo. Just imagine how expensive and time-consuming it must have been to import a silver dish in the 7th century. When the ship was buried, England as we know it didn't exist. The people living in Britain then were the Anglo-Saxons. The ship may have belonged to one of their kings and was buried in the grassy mounds of Suffolk. But we may never know for sure. The acidic soil destroyed any human remains, or maybe no body was buried there at all. It could have been a cenotaph, a monument built to honor someone important. Archaeologists still don't have a definitive answer, but what they found at Sutton Hoo shed a lot of light on the so-called Dark Ages. Before that discovery, historians knew almost nothing about what life in Britain was like after the Romans left. Now we have a much clearer picture of early Anglo-Saxon society. And who knows? Maybe English soil will lead to the next big archaeological breakthrough. Have you heard of Göbekli Tepe? It's an ancient site in Turkey that literally made historians rewrite history books. Over 11,000 years ago, a group of prehistoric humans built this mysterious masterpiece. It's even older than Stonehenge. Before its discovery, archaeologists believed early people had no knowledge of metal or good pottery, and they thought that settled life only began once people started farming. But Göbekli Tepe flipped that idea upside down. It revealed that it was actually temples, not farms, that may have led to settled life.
Enter Professor Klaus Schmidt, the man whose work changed that theory. He was able to prove that hunter-gatherers themselves laid the foundation for the kind of settled life we now associate with farming societies. Back in the 1960s, other archaeologists had visited the area, but they totally missed the significance. During a survey, they noticed a hill with scattered limestone slabs and assumed it was just a medieval cemetery. They had no idea what was really buried there.
Then, in 1994, Schmidt began his own survey of prehistoric sites in the region. And surprise, he immediately realized he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Unlike the flat, dry plateaus around it, Göbekli Tepe had a gently rounded hilltop that rose about 50 feet above the surrounding landscape. And the funny thing, the name Göbekli Tepe actually means potbelly hill.
Schmidt was convinced that only humans could have built something like this. Those broken limestone pieces that people once thought were tombstones? They were something far more exciting. It was like discovering a hidden treasure. Suddenly, everything started to make more sense.
Schmidt and his team were about to dive into the secrets buried just beneath the surface. But to their surprise, they didn't find any signs of a settlement. No cooking pits, no houses, Not even the typical clay figurines usually found at other sites from the same time. Still, they discovered that these ancient people had used tools like stone hammers. So, Schmidt's team put their heads together and tried to figure out how old the stone structures at Göbekli Tepe were. Some limited carbon dating done on site backed up their estimate. Slowly, the ancient atmosphere of the place began to make sense. It was like putting together a giant puzzle piece by piece.
Now, you might think people back then didn't have the right tools to build something as impressive as Göbekli Tepe, but that's not true. Turns out, these prehistoric builders used flint tools instead of fancy metal chisels. They were pretty skilled too. They could shape the soft limestone on the spot into pillars, then carry them a short distance uphill and stand them upright. Once each stone circle was finished, they covered it with layers of earth. Over time, they added more circles and boom! There you have it. A huge mound that would one day blow archaeologists' minds.
In their first year of digging, the team examined over 15,000 bones from wild animals. These people didn't have domesticated animals or farm their own food. They hunted to survive. But that was about to change, because the area had everything they needed to start farming. Scientists say the people had access to wild sheep and wild grains that could be domesticated. And guess what? Just 20 meters away, geneticists found evidence of the oldest domesticated wheat in the world, in a prehistoric village. This discovery totally flipped our understanding of civilization.
See, experts used to think people had to learn to farm and settle down before they could build temples or complex societies. But Schmidt's research turned that idea upside down. He argued that the massive effort needed to build these amazing structures may have actually come first, and led to the development of advanced societies. That means cultural and societal changes might have happened before farming did.
Schmidt even had a pretty interesting theory. Maybe Göbekli Tepe was a special burial site, a place where people came to lay their loved ones to rest. And here's the twist. The burial site was decorated with fancy carvings and symbols that may have represented gods or spiritual beings. The idea that Göbekli Tepe could have been a sacred place adds a whole new layer to the story. Even if we never know exactly what the site was for, Schmidt's insights make us think deeply about how ancient hunter-gatherers may have viewed the afterlife and honored their ancestors. Now, let's talk about the stars of the show, the mysterious T-shaped pillars that dominate Göbekli Tepe. These structures are massive, anywhere from 10 to 20 feet tall, and they probably represent stylized human figures. But one sculpture stands out, a three-dimensional carving of a lion. That really sparks the imagination. Why? Because it hints that lions may have roamed Anatolia during the Neolithic era. The stones are arranged in circular patterns, placed in rectangular pits. Each circle is laid out the same way, two big T-shaped pillars in the center, surrounded by slightly smaller pillars facing inward. Pretty neat, right?
Some of these giant pillars are up to 16 feet tall and weigh between 7 and 10 tons. A few are simple, but others are like works of art, carved with incredible detail. Foxes, scorpions, vultures, they all come to life, crawling and slithering across the stone surfaces. But it's not just animals. Some pillars have abstract human shapes or even tiny carvings of clothes, including belts.
There's one pillar, though, that steals the spotlight. This ancient stone may actually tell the story of a comet crashing into Earth, an event that kicked off a 1,000-year-long cold period. Scientists had already suspected this from studying ice cores in Greenland, but now the carvings at Göbekli Tepe might prove it. The carvings are like an ancient comic strip. One even shows a headless human figure. When researchers fed the images into a computer, they found links to constellations, suggesting this temple may have also served as an ancient observatory. It's like our ancestors were trying to document a massive global event in their own unique way. Since the mid-1990s, archaeologists have been digging and studying Göbekli Tepe, uncovering layer after layer of history and giving us a deeper understanding of the complex relationship between early humans, their beliefs, and the world around them. There are still many different elements to uncover, and archaeologists have no plans to stop digging at Göbekli Tepe for at least another 150 years. Who knows what else they'll find?
As you might know, Göbekli Tepe has long been labeled as purely a ritual site with no signs of everyday living. We've been led to believe that the lack of water nearby meant it couldn't have supported even semi-permanent communities. But now scientists are starting to rethink that. They say it's time to look at Göbekli Tepe with fresh eyes. Maybe it's time to question what we thought we knew and start using new evidence and new ways of thinking.
For example, maybe there was a group of people living in the area, not staying in one place all year round, but moving around a bit, while still building and maintaining a semi-settled civilization. And Göbekli Tepe isn't just one temple, it's an incredible complex made up of over 20 ancient buildings. As archaeologists dig deeper, they keep discovering more unique architectural features, especially the two large central pillars at the heart of each structure, surrounded by smaller ones and divided by stone walls. Here's the crazy part. There are more than 200 of these tall, narrow stone pillars, what they call stelae, scattered around the site. Now fast forward to 1898. You're taking part in an excavation at Saqqara, not far from Cairo, a place full of tombs and ancient pyramids.
You're feeling like Indiana Jones, hoping to uncover something amazing. Golden scrolls, treasure maps, mummies of famous pharaohs.
Instead,
You find a wooden bird. Major letdown. It looks like a regular old toy, sure, an ancient one, but still just a toy.
what you don't know is that years later someone would suggest this bird might actually be a model of an early airplane. The artifact, now known as the Saqqara bird, is made from sycamore wood. Its wingspan is only about 7 inches and it weighs roughly 40 grams. It honestly seems like the perfect Egyptian souvenir. It's over 2,000 years old and looks pretty basic. No fancy feathers or decorations. But it does have eyes and a beak, giving it the look of a falcon, symbol of the god Horus. Its tail, however, is kind of strange. It's square-shaped and sticks up awkwardly with a notch that may have once held a missing piece.
People love a good mystery, so naturally many theories popped up to explain the bird's purpose. The simplest idea? It was ceremonial. Another theory says it might have been a toy, maybe for a wealthy child. Others thought it could be a boomerang-style object, which was a known concept in ancient Egypt.
Then there was the idea that it was used to test the wind, like a weather vane, but that got debunked because the bird didn't have any holes or signs of being hung up, apart from ones added much later by the Cairo Museum for display. Almost a century after it was found, an Egyptologist named Dr. Khalil Messiha came up with a bold new theory. The bird might actually be a model of a monoplane, an ancient airplane. He noted that the bird lacked a horizontal tail stabilizer, which modern aircraft need. If it had one, its wings would have been set at a right angle, similar to real planes. He even suggested it could have generated enough aerodynamic lift to glide. Dr. Messiah also pointed out that ancient Egyptians often placed miniature versions of technology and inventions in tombs, so why not a plane? If true, that would mean the Egyptians invented the idea of flight around 200 BC, 2,000 years before the Wright brothers, who made their first powered flight in 1903.
Only one way to know for sure. Test it. But let's be real. There's no way the Cairo Museum would let anyone toss one of their precious artifacts through the air like a toy.
So instead, a glider designer named Martin Gregory built a replica out of balsa wood and tested it. His conclusion, even with a replacement tail, it didn't exactly fly well. Mystery solved? Not quite. It wasn't enough to convince the History Channel, who brought in an aerodynamic expert to build another replica. This one was tested under weather conditions similar to those in Egypt, and it performed surprisingly well.
So, if the ancient Egyptians really did design a prototype glider back in the day, it would be a huge example of something called an out-of-place artifact, a piece of technology far ahead of its time. And the Saqqara bird isn't the only one.
In 1901, a group of divers pulled another mysterious object from a shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera. It became known as the Antikythera Mechanism, and it's widely considered the world's first analog computer, dating back to around 100 BC. Made of bronze, this device could track the movements of the sun, moon, stars, and planets. It even predicted lunar phases, solar eclipses, and how fast the moon would move across the sky. No one knows exactly who built it, where, or how it was used, but one thing's for sure, it was way more advanced than anything else from that time. It's about time. People think the first flushing toilets were invented in the 20th century, but that's just a joke. In fact, both the ancient Minoans on the Mediterranean island of Crete and the Indus Valley civilization came up with this genius idea around 4,000 years ago. Their plumbing and drainage systems were so advanced that no one managed to improve on them for another 2,000 years. An ancient Minoan toilet was found in the Palace of Knossos. It looks like it had a wooden seat placed over a tunnel that funneled water from a rooftop tank down into an underground drainage system. Some other types of toilets used water poured in from jugs. Only the super rich could afford this kind of luxury, so if you were house hunting back then, finding a flush toilet was a sure sign you were in a fancy neighborhood. Now let's talk automatic doors. You might think they were a cool new invention from 1931, but the idea behind them is way older. Back in the 1st century AD, a mathematician and engineer named Heron of Alexandria invented a hydraulic system to open and close temple doors. But to make it work, you had to light a fire. Under the fire was a half-filled copper pot with water in it. As the fire heated the pot, water moved through pipes into hanging containers that acted as weights. The containers dropped, pulling ropes that opened the doors. It wasn't exactly like today's supermarket doors that open before you even blink. Heron's system took hours to open the doors, and once the process started, you couldn't stop it. That's why they only opened them once a day, right before temple ceremonies, to create a sense of mystery. Creepy and clever. Now on to ancient electricity. What might be the first battery in history was discovered near Baghdad, and it's over 2,000 years old. In 1938, a German archaeologist found a clay jar shaped like an egg. Scientists still aren't sure who made it or what it was really for. One theory says it was used to electroplate metals, like coating things in gold or silver. When the jar was filled with a mild acid like vinegar, it produced about 1 volt of electricity. Another theory? It was just a container for sacred scrolls. Either way, it's a pretty wild artifact. Want to buy contact lenses designed by Leonardo da Vinci back in 1508? He came up with the idea of a glass lens with a funnel on one side filled with water. It was meant to improve your vision, but yeah, it sounds super uncomfortable. About 100 years later, a French scientist named René Descartes tried to make it better by designing a lens that actually touched the eye's surface, what we now call a contact lens. Get it? Because it contacts your eye. It worked, sort of. The glass tube filled with liquid helped people see better, but blinking was impossible, not ideal. Fast forward 250 years, and new glass-making tech finally made lenses that fit the eye and even let you blink. Thanks, science, but those early lenses were heavy, made from blown glass, and didn't let the eye breathe. Another 50 years later, contact lenses finally became lightweight, plastic, unbreakable and scratch-resistant, but they still covered the entire eye. Then in 1948, a British optical technician accidentally sanded down a plastic lens and realized that it stayed in place even when it only covered the cornea. Game changer. Now imagine living in 19th century London and needing to send a message to New York. By ship, that would take about 10 days. So when delivery times suddenly dropped to a few hours in 1858, people were amazed. Queen Victoria herself sent the very first message. How? Thanks to the transatlantic telegraph cable, which ran across the ocean floor. Sadly, the new invention broke down just weeks later, and it took years to fix it again. Still, it was a major step toward modern communication. Ever heard of flying palaces? Ancient Indian texts describe beautifully decorated chariots, or even entire palaces, called vimanas, that could take off and fly into space within seconds. Some people say vimanas were just part of mythology, but others think they might be based on real lost technology. According to the Vedas, sacred Hindu scriptures, there were vimanas shaped like elephants with multiple engines, plus other types named after birds and animals. There was one for local travel, another for visiting other countries, and one meant for trips to the moon and planets beyond. They were said to travel at incredible speeds. So, if you've enjoyed this trip through forgotten history, comment and support our mission to uncover the truth behind ancient